A key point here is that Napoleon is very small, and this is one of the first images we see where Gillray creates this image of tiny Napoleon, little Boney here. Welcome back to The World of the Georgians. In this 6-part video series for the History Extra Academy, I'm exploring this extraordinary era through the sharp and witty world of 18th century caricature and satire. Today we're tackling one of history's greatest military leaders, Napoleon Bonaparte. For people in Georgian Britain, Napoleon wasn't just a distant emperor, he was the country's greatest enemy. Born in 1769 on the island of Corsica, he joined the French army as a relative outsider. But his rise through the ranks was quick, and during the chaos of the French Revolution, Napoleon proved himself as a brilliant strategist, winning victories in Italy and becoming a national hero almost overnight. By 1799, he wasn't just a general anymore. He staged a coup, grabbed power, and within a few years crowned himself Emperor of the French. This wasn't just ego, it was a statement. Napoleon answered to no one. Under his rule, France reshaped Europe. His army spread revolutionary ideas, but they also sparked years of brutal conflict, the Napoleonic Wars. He defeated coalition after coalition, redrew borders and created a new legal system, the Napoleonic Code, which still influences laws today. But ambition has limits, and Napoleon's disastrous invasion of Russia in 1812 cost him most of his army. After more defeats, he was forced to abdicate in 1814 and was exiled to Elba. Of course, Napoleon being Napoleon, he escaped, raised another army and tried again. That final gamble ended at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, where he was decisively beaten. This time, he was sent much farther away to the remote island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic. There, Napoleon lived out his last years, dying in 1821 at the age of 51. It was concluded from an autopsy that the cause of his death was stomach cancer. Now, in France, Napoleon was lionized as a modern Caesar. In Britain, he was feared, mocked, and endlessly caricatured. And it's through some of these caricatures that we'll explore him today. When we think about figures from history like Napoleon, we might envisage them through the grand portraits that were created. This one shows Napoleon crossing the Alps. It was by Jacques-Louis David, and it is a magnificent painting. There's no question about that. Look at this horse. It's this magnificently muscly beast, and Napoleon himself looks like something from ancient Greece or ancient Rome. Indeed, David, the artist, was very much influenced by the classical world. But this is definitely a hero, a heroic figure. What James Gillray did was show us the reality. He stripped back this filtered image and he gave us the real man. This is James Gillray's version of Napoleon. It was created in 1803. And this is a really important image in the entire myth-making around Napoleon, the entire myth-making of Britain's relationship with France. Because what we're seeing here is not the grand emperor-like figure on a strong horse crossing the Alps. We're seeing a toddler having a tantrum. Here is Napoleon stamping his feet. We've got all of these documents on the floor. We've got his enormous bicorn hat thrown across on the floor. This table has been overturned. This grand chair overturned. The globe overturned. It's titled Maniac Ravings, or Little, that's the important word here, Little Boney in a strong fit. He's having a fit. And I always think it's a toddler-like persona that he's got. You know, when young children, they are so angry, you can see the anger building up inside them, and all they do is just have a massive tantrum in the middle of the street, much to the embarrassment of their parents. But this is what's happening with Napoleon. You can see his anger, you can really feel it. And out of his figure are all of these phrases, all of these words, as if they're speech marks, or at least thoughts coming from Napoleon himself. And they're like white hot flames emerging from his mind. And these reflect his innermost thoughts. So I can read some of them to you. The English newspapers, oh, English newspapers, insolence of British Parliament. Oh, Egypt, Egypt, Egypt. You know, they're not even fully formed sentences, they're just exclamations. London newspapers, oh, oh, oh. Oh, I'm murdered, I'm assassinated. And then he names all of his opponents in Britain. Grenville, Pitt, invasion, invasion, revenge, revenge, come, fire, sword, famine. So this is very much not a statesman in control of his thoughts, in control of his feelings. It's someone who is at the mercy of an uncontrolled rage. But a key point here is that Napoleon is very small. And this is one of the first images we see where Gillray creates this image of tiny Napoleon, little Boney here. And I love this, you know, this is an incredibly powerful man. And the way that the British caricaturists insult him is with a very personal insult in his own physical size. And this really shows the power of artists such as James Gillray, that we see Napoleon depicted as a small figure for the first time. And it is a propaganda campaign, essentially, that creates the myth that Napoleon was short. This is probably the most famous image ever created by James Gillray, perhaps one of the most famous images of the Georgian age. It is the plum pudding in danger, and it was created in 1805. And what we're looking at here is two men sitting at a table dissecting an enormous plum pudding. On the left, we have William Pitt, who was the British Prime Minister, and opposite him, we have Napoleon, very short Napoleon, you'll notice, who's completely dwarfed by this enormous hat with these large feathers. And they are cutting up what appears to be a great steaming plum pudding, which is probably quite similar to how we have our Christmas puddings today. It was a very popular and common meal or dish. But if you actually look a little closer, you realise that this plum pudding is the globe itself. It represents the globe. You can see the map of Europe marked out here. You can see the oceans. And these two figures are slicing off parts of this globe, of this plum pudding, in a reflection of the power that each of them has on that area of the world. So William Pitt has a huge slice, which is the Atlantic Ocean, and that represents Britain's naval superiority, so command of the seas. And Napoleon, though he's got this much smaller slice, it is all of Europe. And so this is a commentary on these two figures, these two nations, and their control over the world, or their dominance in different parts of the world. The title is The Plum Pudding in Danger, but it's got this wonderful subquote, if you like. It's actually a misquote from Shakespeare, and it reads, "The great globe itself and all which it inherit is too small to satisfy such insatiable appetites." So this is a commentary on the insatiable appetites of these two figures, or these two nations, I suppose. This insatiable appetite, is this a greed? Is this a greediness? Is this saying, you know, isn't Britain enough? Isn't France enough? Do we really need to be taking these enormous slices for ourselves? Now, because of these timeless themes of great powers or great political figures arguing over an important commodity and slicing it up, this image has been replicated by many cartoonists ever since. And so you'll often see this in the newspapers, sometimes on the cover of political magazines, where the figures of Pitt and Napoleon have been replaced by modern politicians. So apart from this commentary on the moment in British history in 1805, another important thing to look at is the size of Napoleon, because again, look how small he is compared to Pitt, who is depicted as very tall and lanky. Napoleon can't even sit on the chair he's been given. And so again, this is creating this myth of Napoleon as very short. So we've seen how effective Gillray could be in shaping the image of Napoleon and creating these incredible myths. But it wasn't just Napoleon, and he was commentating on all the political events throughout his life. And one of the big events was the French Revolution, the execution of King Louis. And I think this image, just to give you a sense of the wider politics of the time, is brilliant for capturing a difficult moment in the 1790s. So here we have Britannia between Scylla and Charybdis. So Scylla and Charybdis is this story from ancient mythology where it basically means the lesser of two evils. It was a story when there was Scylla, which is this terrible monster lurking in the rocks, and Charybdis, which was this whirlpool. And it was a story about how sailors would have to choose between either of those two dangers. Here we have William Pitt, who is the Prime Minister, and he is steering this boat, the Constitution, and within the boat is Britannia. And you'll notice the boat is pretty low in the water. This does not look like a boat which is steady. It looks like it might be overturned with one gust of wind or one enormous wave. And they are heading towards this quite bleak-looking place in the distance, supposedly titled with a flag, the Haven of Public Happiness. So the idea is that Pitt is desperately trying to take the nation to a place of safety, of public happiness. At this moment in history, King Louis of France had just been executed a few months before. So it was a really tense moment in France. And there was every reason that the tensions and the political difficulties in France could easily spread to England. So a lot of people in England, in London, were terrified of the events in France happening in England too. And so the events in France were very much discussed and considered. And so what we see here are the two options for Pitt, if you like. On the left, we have the Rock of Democracy, as declared in the caption here. And this is essentially Scylla, the lair of Scylla. And we've got the dogs of Scylla here, which is Pitt's opponents. You can see Charles James Fox is at the front there. So a very surreal thing to be depicting. And we've got the cap of the French revolutionaries. And so this is representing the cause of the revolution, I suppose. Should Pitt give in to those ideals, or will that itself be something that creates more danger? Or should he steer right towards this whirlpool of arbitrary power? And you can see beneath the water is an upturned crown. So it's basically suggesting that Pitt could have a heavy hand, use the full force of law, use the full force of the crown, and lean into the strength of the monarchy, and emphasise that Britain was a place where monarchy was to be a strong thing that would last the centuries, unlike as had happened in France. So it's a very difficult position that Pitt's in. And you can see Gillray has brilliantly visually captured the two dilemmas and the two options that he has. You know, it is a beautiful image in its own right, but also gives us such an insight into the difficulties in those early years of the 1790s. In the next episode, we'll be looking at how Georgian satire tackled developments in science and technology, focusing on healthcare in the period, where the line between cure and quackery was often blurred.